Is that we could argue that the outlook has never been quite so uncertain.
Among the uncertainties is the search for a vaccine, the risk of lurching back into a lockdown if the virus flares up again, and the damage done to the consumer psyche.
The consumer is going to have this lagged consumption recovery because there are going to be fears around the second wave of virus outbreaks. There's going to be fears around job insecurity as well.
But Chris Bedingfield says people shouldn't be surprised by the disconnect between the share market and the economy.
There is a misconception that the share market reflects the economy, which it really doesn't. The share market reflects company profit outlooks.
The Australian market has come back from its 37% crash in March, but it's still around 22% lower than its peak. To some, that's a realistic take on corporate profits.
These revisions are about minus 25% since the crisis hit in mid-February. The market's down since that point by a similar magnitude. So you can make the argument that the market is being rational, at this juncture at least.
But the biggest factor driving global equity markets is the trillions being pumped into the global economy by central banks and governments.
The scale of the monetary stimulus is really beyond almost all comprehension. Across JP Morgan, when we look at the global picture, we think it's in the order of something around $17 trillion US.
It's a massive transfer of wealth from the public to the private sector. Post-GFC, stimulus measures saw US corporate profits rise strongly, and that's going to happen again.
People shouldn't underestimate how much this fiscal spending is going to show up, either in the accounts of households, or if households choose to spend that money, it's going to end up in the accounts of businesses.
Investors are wise to the fact that US policymakers are virtually underwriting the cash flow of corporate America. The central bank is committed to buying corporate debt, including high-yielding junk bonds.
But there are very few, if any, hiccups built into investors' expectations of a reasonable recovery next year on the back of the discovery of a vaccine.
If that proves to be harder or more drawn out than expected, that is a risk that probably today isn't priced.
We're pricing in this aggressive V-shaped recovery, and that's just something we don't think is going to materialise.
And if science disappoints, the patience of populations may be seriously tested.
I do worry about that side of it as well, and there's nothing the Fed can do about social unrest.
But even in today's world, the limits of the policymakers' powers are being exposed.
Panic buying aside, the pandemic has seen a sharp pullback in spending as cash-strapped shoppers close their wallets. Those still shopping are increasingly doing so online. Australia Post recording an 80% jump in parcel traffic. Investment in digital platforms has been a lifeline for many retailers, but others, depending on foot traffic, could struggle to reopen their doors. Here's Stephanie Chalmers.
Doors have reopened, but things are looking very different at this shoe store.
We let families in that sit together because they've obviously been in the same household.
It wasn't hard to practice social distancing at this Melbourne shopping centre on a Monday morning, with few shoppers around.
Almost 3 to 4 days after our shutdown, we started to notice that our online sales were growing exponentially.
Accent Group owns footwear brands including Platypus, Skechers, Hype DC and The Athlete's Foot. In the last 2 weeks of April, its online sales reached between $800,000 to $1.1 million a day, compared to an average of $250,000 prior to the shutdown. After standing down 5,000 staff across Australia and New Zealand, Daniel Agostinelli called some back to work to operate so-called dark stores.
Essentially, we had some teams through the lockdown simply fulfilling digital orders via our stores that was closest to our customers.
And it's Australia Post on the front line. It saw an 80% increase in online shopping over the past 8 weeks. That peaked around Easter, making it the biggest online shopping weekend for Australia on record. And more people were shopping online during the day compared to the usual nighttime rush. Will normally shops in store, but was forced online in recent weeks.
One of the times that I get my shopping done has been pretty late on a Thursday night. And I found that some of the retailers, they just weren't operating at that time anymore.
He ordered some hardware items on a Thursday night, and living in inner Sydney, they were at his door by Saturday morning.
If we can continue receiving deliveries as quickly as they've started to come through now, that'd be great.
There's a lot of people that have been forced into a new behaviour, and 1 in 3 of the consumers that we surveyed said that they would continue this behaviour. Indeed, they would increase their digital purchasing behaviour over the next 12 months.
Boston Consulting Group found more older Australians shopped online for the first time during April.
We've seen that our baby boomers and silvers, those people in our population above 52 years of age, have really increased, their first-time digital purchases.
1 in 5 online shoppers splashed out on a new category, accelerating what's been a relatively slow uptake.
There's been quite a reluctance on both behalf of the retailers to invest in digital platforms significantly, and also a reluctance from the consumer's perspective.
That's left many retailers unprepared for increased online sales.
Being able to clear stock at a discount obviously leads to significant losses for the retailers, whilst at the same time they're having to invest in their digital platforms.
As retailers pour more money into their online platforms, they'll be looking for savings elsewhere, including on rent. A number of companies have already chosen not to renew expiring leases and threatened further store closures as they negotiate with landlords. Accent Group will close 28 stores when the leases expire over the next 6 months.
Some stores will simply have to close where we can't get the metrics right.
While online is making up a higher percentage of retailers' sales, overall sales of clothing and footwear have tumbled.
We will see significant store closures, we will see a reduced offering in terms of brands that are available in the market.
We're as worried as every other retailer. What does the future look like?
Stores are reopening, but it's far from business as usual.
Stephanie Chalmers reporting. The decision by Qantas to disregard social distancing on its planes has raised eyebrows, including among some medical experts. The national carrier is planning a rapid return to the skies by the middle of the year, but says it needs to try to fill all of its seats.
On the ground, there are limits on the number of customers in an enclosed space.
We would love to have more people sitting in, but we also want to be as safe as possible.
This Melbourne cafe normally seats 40, but it's takeaway only until restrictions ease in Victoria next month.
You really have to look at it from a bigger picture, and as unfair as it may seem, it may be a decent way moving forward.
Social distancing rules don't apply in the sky. Qantas has announced it hopes to have up to half its domestic fleet back in the air by July, using every seat. Qantas' most popular plane on domestic routes is a 737. There are 162 seats in economy, 12 in business. That's a total of 174 passengers. Observing social distancing, with 4 square metres per passenger, would look like this. That's a total of 21 passengers on board. The Qantas boss says that wouldn't be feasible.
That means airfares are going to be 8 to 9 times more than they are today.
On Rex, masks are mandatory. Virgin Australia's limited flights leave the middle seat empty. But Qantas says precautions like air conditioning filters and providing hand sanitizer and masks will suffice. Not all medical experts are convinced.
This sends a double message to the public by not keeping social distancing and yet being required by the government to keep social distancing. It's very confusing for the public, and it also potentially places the public at risk.
The issue, as ever, is money. While Qantas says it can't apply social distancing rules, the thought of a cramped plane could turn off a lot of potential customers. But in future, flights will be cleaner and they could be cheaper to encourage people to take to the skies.
And that's all from Close of Business. I'm Rachel Papazzoni. Thanks for watching.